Good morning, new week, all new morning meeting. Thank you for joining. This is Mark Halpern reporting live from somewhere. Sean and Dan also here. Gentlemen, welcome. How are your weekends?
Lovely.
It's great.
Lovely. Great. All right. Well, we're
How
glad
wait,
everybody's
how is Taylor Swift?
exceeded expectations.
Can I just say, Mark, I thought James crushed it. I was a little disappointed in the attire. I thought that the whole goal was to, I mean, he was in full Taylor mode. I saw his friendship bracelets. No friendship bracelets for Mark Halperin. I don't know. I just didn't understand. I mean, I didn't know
No,
if he
no
could
one,
get them.
no one offered me once. It was so nice. A woman behind James tapped him on the shoulder during the concert and gave him an additional bracelet. If you're interested to know how Sean knows I wasn't wearing bracelets, you can go to my Instagram feed and see a little clip of a moment of the concert. It was incredible. It's a great show, and she broke down and cried, which I thought probably she does every show, but it turns out, according to the media, no, she this was unusual. So we went on a good night. If you wanted to see Taylor emotional, as my son says, she cried happy tears. It was very good. If you haven't seen it, I'd get to Vancouver because there's three shows left, and that's your last opportunity. It's epic. Michelle Obama said Hamilton was the greatest work of art of all time. These concerts are pretty incredible. All right, most people are not interested in this, so we'll move on. Thank you for joining. This is the morning meeting where we cover Taylor Swift, American politics, and fake punts. Glad that you joined. If you're here on the two-way platform, you're in luck. You can ask Dan and Sean a question or make a comment about anything you want by raising your electronic hand, and we welcome you to do that, regardless of who you support in the presidential election or whether you've asked a question in the past or not. In fact, we like when new people talk. So please, we had some great new folks at the end of last week, and we hope that continues this week, where we're doing just two shows, two morning meetings, two ways tonight. So we'll be off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If you're watching on YouTube, please continue to put trash in the chat. We love when you do that. I'm going for reverse psychology this week because telling you not to put trash in the chat is not working. Glad that you're here. I'll run through the day. We'll kick things around, and then we'll take your questions. And again, we're very grateful to you for supporting Two Way. Thank you. All right. Uh, as to be expected in a holiday week, not much going on. And because President Trump has beaten all indoor and outdoor records in naming members of his government, we may not get any personnel announcements this week. We might, as Sean will tell you in a moment, there are some jobs still open that are big, and some people who we thought would get jobs who haven't yet gotten jobs. But for the most part, President Trump way ahead of schedule. I think because he knows more about what he wants and who he wants and what he wants to do. We'll talk about that. The current president pardons the Thanksgiving turkey at 11 a.m. His wife accepts the Christmas tree in the afternoon. And then they both go to Staten Island. And at 6:15, they deliver remarks and serve food at a Friendsgiving event at the U.S. Coast Guard sector, New York. Interesting choice. Not quite sure why they're doing that there, but they are, and very nice for the holidays and for those they'll be with. The vice president and her husband leave Hawaii for San Francisco at 10:30 a.m. Hawaii time, which I believe is 4:30 Eastern. And then they arrive in San Francisco, and not sure what they're doing there, but that's where they're going. Donald Trump, no public events. JD Vance, no public events. Congress home for the holidays. All right. So regarding the Trump picks, let's put up graphic number one. As I said, using the television he's named a lot of people, and who've been picked. And as you can see, it's still no person for SBA, U.S. Trade, or Council of Economic Advisors, or next slide, some of the non-Senate confirmed jobs. We still don't have someone to head, which to me is a very big job. So, Sean Spicer, resident Trump expert, what are the lessons for you from a group of personnel picks, some of whom have very left-wing positions, some of whom are very MAGA? What's your sort of macro takeaways from this list of people selected?
Proximity is key. You've seen this with a lot of the picks. You can't just be out in California hoping the phone rings. Being in Mar-a-Lago, being around the president, being around critical people matters. And number two is having a vocal history of supporting the president matters. Those are the two biggest criteria that you can see. And I think that on the flip side, you've seen a guy like Pompeo, where just the slightest deviation has caused some of the, caused a fallout. So I would argue that proximity and your record matter.
Okay, Dan, what's your takeaway from these varied picks?
Yeah, I think, as Sean said, loyalty, but also the diversity of the picks represents the diversity of his coalition. I mean, the fact that he put a fairly pro-labor member of Congress in as labor secretary, he did well with a lot of working class voters. I mean, the RFK vote was not unimportant to him. And so I think the cabinet actually does reflect his coalition. The question is, can he hold that coalition? You know, how long can you hold the coalition together for politically? That's always the issue for president coming in.
You know, it was funny. There's a CBS poll out this morning. Let me I'll pull it up as I talk. And the thing that was fascinating is they asked both parties whether or not certain nominees were good or bad. And with selection of RFK for Health and Human Services Secretary, good choice, Democrats, 47%, Trump voters, 80%, not a good choice, right? But here's the kicker. RFK scores a heck of a lot higher than Rubio, whatever. I mean, this is a guy heading HHS that is not pro-life by a stretch, which is usually a criteria of Republican voters, that you get somebody who understands the importance of life and defending it. RFK is quite the opposite. I think the takeaway on that is where things fit in the lexicon in terms of right now, the MAHA movement, wellness, vaccines, things like that have overtaken a lot of the traditional issues that Republicans would normally kill for. The idea that you are pointing somebody atop of HHS that is openly anti-life is a very big deal for Republicans. Now, that also speaks to me to this broader point that the nominees don't matter. You are signing up for his agenda, not yours. And so that's sort of the two takeaways on that. But the idea that there's no backlash from the right, there's no SBA, Susan B. Anthony list, there's no Concerned Women from America, all of these organizations and women that have been critical leaders in the movement suddenly going, okay, we're cool with that.
Well, I think his ability to patch that together during the campaign too was a testament to the political skill of the candidate and the senior staff. I imagine that they have maintained very good communication with that group of pro-life support, and there are reasons that they are quiet and confident about what the president will do. As a Democrat, very nervous, but
the overriding takeaway is that the Republican base trusts Donald Trump to fight for the agenda. And they're like, okay, I get it. Tulsi's a Democrat. I get it. RFK said these, is not pro-life. But we trust Donald Trump to advance the agenda, and we understand that these people are vehicles for him. He has completely changed the mind shift of how these things are approached. I mean, a nominee normally would be like, you said this, you said that, this is what you voted on in the past. And everyone's sort of like, as long as you agree that you're signing up for his agenda, we're okay with you.
I'd say, Sean, you're right, but there's another factor, which you saw during the convention when the platform was changed to be less pro-life. And the pro-life groups complained, and Chris LaCivita said, go find another platform if you don't like ours. In other words, part of it is they trust him, but part of it is they were taught during the campaign that if they can scream and yell, and then they don't get what they want. And the problem for the left, I think, compared to the right, and I think this is asymmetrical right now, is when an interest group complains and it gets what it wants, it learns it can get what it wants by complaining. When an interest group complains and doesn't get what it wants, it says, holy cow, if we keep complaining and not getting what we want, we'll look weak. Our donors won't give to us. Our members will be dispirited. Better to just pretend it didn't happen if we're not going to get what we want. And I think Team Trump sent that signal loud and clear during the campaign on almost every issue. And now they're sending it again during the transition with these picks. And if somebody wants to complain about them and then watch them get confirmed, they'll look impotent, and they don't want to look impotent as an interest group. They'd rather look close to a powerful new administration. We'll see, though, because some of these nominees are not out of the woods yet regarding criticism. Some of it is ideological. Some of it is more personal. But I think in the main, it's extraordinary dog not barking, that some of these people farther to the left are not being, savage, and the administration is sticking by them. Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
What's fascinating though is that I spend my mornings just flicking through the morning shows. It's an addiction, and the Today Show had a whole piece this morning on whether fluoride in our water systems is actually a healthy thing and the merits of it, and going back and forth on it. And I'm going, so 2 weeks ago it was insane to talk about it. And now, before the 8 o'clock hour, the key hour in the Today Show, they're having an entire segment talking about the merits of fluoride in the water system, and whether or not, because we've introduced it in toothpaste and mouthwash, whether it's still needed. And my point was, oh my God, the lack. I mean, think about this. A month ago, the idea that this was RFK conspiracy theories. Now the Today Show is kind of like, well, there is some merit to it. We're talking about issues in a way that we wouldn't have a while ago. And it's almost like they want to tacitly admit that, like, okay, there might be some merit there, but we don't want to admit that they were right.
Yeah. All right. So normally the period between now, Thanksgiving into Christmas and New Year's during a presidential year is filled with the president rushing to complete his government by making last minute picks. There are some picks left, but they're not going to get super coverage. And he's done all the major jobs, or almost all of the major jobs. So, Dan, what are you looking to see in the political world between now and New Year's and the new year? What are things you're expecting to happen or wondering about?
On the Republican side, or just in general?
Oh, in general. How will
I
the
mean,
morning meet? What will be the topics of this program when we're on the air between now and New Year's?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is what we just talked about, which is can Trump hold this coalition together? You know, how long? Someone put in the chat, the National Review is starting to, question some of it, and not that the National Review is nearly as powerful as it was 20 years ago. But one, how long does harmony and peace last in the Trump administration? And two, where do the Democrats go from here? And I think we're going to get to that topic, in a minute. But there's really no sign from Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer exactly how they're going to approach the president and the new Congress when it starts in January. And what do all these candidates out there that are thinking of running for president in 2028, how do they approach the fact that Kamala Harris is, thinking about doing this again? And who is going to try to, seize that microphone before her?
Sean.
So I think that the beauty of the question you just asked might have been missed by some. Like, I love what the Trump team did, right? They flooded the zone. They got it out there early. We can pivot enough. I'm hoping, well, let me start with why I think that what you asked was so important. Normally, you kind of space these things out, right? So you've got between now and January 20th, let's call it, 10 weeks. And it's like, okay, we're going to do some of the economic announcements, chairman of economic advisors, the NEC announcement, whatever, Treasury. We'll talk about some policies that'll blow out 4 days. Then we'll move on to whatever. And you kind of space it out, and you start to, your goal is to own the oxygen, something that Trump does very well. The problem that exists right now is we're going into Thanksgiving, and minus the administrator of SBA and the U.S. trade rep, the two other cabinet slots left, the oxygen's like, now the press is having the same question that you did, Mark, which was, what do we do? God, let's talk about backgrounds of these nominees. Let's delve into the financing of the transition. They've got to figure out post Thanksgiving, starting the next, maybe you get a pass on Friday because of the Macy's parade or something. But post that, how are you going to take up the oxygen in the room? And they've got to figure out, how do we start doing things? Because we don't have any more nominees. No one cares about the Deputy Undersecretary of the Interior, with all due respect to the Interior Department and national parks. They do. So they're going to try to find things to cover and controversies to conjure up. So my concern, if you're Team Trump, is how do you start to roll things out? Maybe you pivot to policy and talk about day one stuff. Maybe you talk about, we're going to talk about immigration this week, but that wasn't a big thing that Trump did we actually held rallies, if you recall, North Carolina, Wisconsin, in 2016 to try to keep the momentum going. How do they take that time up between next Monday and Christmas, and then post New Year's to the 20th?
So I agree with you. There's all sorts of things they could do. I don't think Donald Trump will visit a mosque, but he could. I don't know that he'll go back on Joe Rogan, but he could. So I'm curious to see how much public stuff he does, because we talked about last week, he's done barely any public stuff of late, except for the event you were at Mar-a-Lago. So I'm curious to see what he does and how much they try to shape the policy agenda, how much they reach out to Democrats, both in terms of messaging, but also, does he call Chuck Schumer and talk about legislation? Does he call Jeffries? How much did they try to dominate the next couple months? And then I'm obviously very curious about Israel and the Middle East. I'm very curious about Ukraine and what happens on those fronts. And then I continue to be mocked for saying it matters who DNC chair will be. I continue to believe it matters if it's someone who's great. If it's someone who's okay, I don't think it matters. But I'm curious to see who gets
Well,
in the
no,
race.
but that's the point, though, is that's,
Yeah.
I don't need to keep going back, but I think in 2012, we talked about this before, having the ability to lead and say, we need to do an after action report and we need to kind of be honest about where we are, takes leadership. And if you elect someone that's going to be a wallflower and put their head in the, then that
I agree.
does
I'm just saying, I agree, but I'm just saying some people say to me, who cares who the DNC chair is? And I'm saying I agree if it's just someone who's going to raise money and hire people. If it's someone who's a dominating figure in message setting and post-morteming, I think it does matter a lot for the party potentially. All right. Speaking of the Democrats, Kamala Harris, big Politico story today. First story of this kind that I've seen. You can put up the headline, please. In which the balance of the piece is very much favorable towards the concept of her having a political future. And it says, she might run for governor of California, she might run for president again, but that, she was a great candidate. None of this was her fault. She's got tons of political capital, tons of goodwill. It's much more bullish on her prospects to either be the governor of California and a dominating figure and win that race, or run for president and not clear the field, but be a dominating figure and a big player than we have been on this program. So, Dan, after reading the Politico story, did you decide you were wrong and Kamala Harris, the demand side for Kamala Harris is quite high?
No, I think that the same type of thing could have been written about Al Gore, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton. Yes, the kind of establishment like poo-pooed them, but if you had done a poll right after, in January of 2001, I think Al Gore was at like 40%. Like everyone wanted to do it again. So it doesn't surprise me that the perception is that she is the leader of the party. I think we've talked here about, so far the stories are about Joe Biden should have gotten out sooner. The problem with the left on woke issues, they couldn't penetrate on the economy. What hasn't happened yet are stories about her as a candidate, right? Why did they not, when they had the data that we've talked about for months, did they not drill down on immigration or the economy? There's been, I think, two stories, one in which supposedly she didn't go on Joe Rogan because they were afraid of offending interest groups. I think you will start to see more stories about her limitations as a candidate, because I believe that what cost her in 2024, and I've said before, I think this was a very winnable race this time around, even though she came in July and all the advantages that Trump had, is that the same character attributes that sunk her in 19, sunk her in 24, which is extreme caution, inability to make quick and nimble decisions, being afraid to offend various interest groups. So when you say you're going to run again, Ronald Reagan ran 3 times, but each time he ran, he was the same candidate with pretty much the same message, and he kept building on his momentum, getting stronger and stronger. She has never shown an ability to build off momentum. I mean, she had maybe the greatest launch in the history of presidential politics this time around, and kind of slowly the air came out of the balloon. And I think that whether who is going to force these questions about her as a candidate are her opponents. People who are thinking about 2028, they've got very skilled staff. They're going to start to leak stories to make sure that she doesn't jump to the front of the line and cut them out. And I don't think any Democrat fears her in 2028. They know she'd be a legit, somebody to have to deal with, but they don't fear that she's a dominant, strong candidate.
Yeah, let's just the Political article basically laid out three scenarios. First is running for governor in 2026. And there's, within the article, I don't necessarily agree that the authors have their pulse on California from Washington, but they think that she'll clear the field from all the other folks that would be popular in Florida. And potentially, just as a side note, that she could then still maybe run for president. I don't agree with that. But then 2 is that she runs straight up 2028. And then 3 is that she gets on boards and whatever and makes money. I have a hard time believing somebody that's never had a private sector job is going to choose number 3. I mean, I'd take the money and go sit on a beach. But I have a hard time. So I have a feeling that she ends up running for governor. It's to me, it would still be a huge, I mean, it's a big platform to have. She could probably get it a lot easier than and a lot quicker, right? It gives her something to pivot to much sooner than hoping that she stays alive till 2028.
So I was asked the question when somebody's potentially up for a job like that is not can they win? And I think her chances of winning are overrated in that story. It's does she want the job? Does she really want to go live in Sacramento, fight with liberals in the legislature, take over a state that's got some problems? I'm just not sure she wants to be governor of California. And if
Could
she
I
has
ask?
to be, well, if she has to be governor for a full term before she can run for president again, that to me, that's not a great bet if it's just a stepping stone. So if you don't want the job and it's not a great stepping stone, I'm just skeptical that she'd decide that was a thing to do. Dan.
Yeah, and I still what's missing from running for governor of California or president is why do you want it? Like, what
Correct.
is animating you to want to like go and fix? Like, Hillary Clinton always talked about wanting to help kids. You know, Al Gore's got climate change. We still don't know why she wanted to be president in 20, why she wanted to be president, other than, as Sean, you said, she's been in government for 30 years. She doesn't really know what's next. She's been on the cusp of like the highest office now for the last several years. And California governors, if you can't be president, maybe she's thinking is, but I'm not, Mark, I agree with you. I don't even know who would fear her for governor if she can't, she doesn't have a reason to run. She can't take positions that are clear. You have what happened in San Francisco where the school board got flipped over because of focus on woke issues. The mayor of San Francisco just went down because of the inability to deal with crime. You're going to have to step in and say,
well,
where are you on all these issues?
There'd be somebody to her right and somebody to her left.
Yep.
And I'm not sure how she handles that because that's back to her key weakness.
I also don't know the dynamics enough, but I would tell you that I wouldn't, if I were Gavin Newsom, I don't want her back in the state, you know, with a platform. It's one more complicating factor.
So one of the big things over the weekend and in last week as well was this kind of congealing conventional wisdom in some quarters. It was an unwinnable race because the economy was bad and the administration was unpopular. And of course, what I keep saying to that is, then she shouldn't have run if she couldn't win as part of the Biden-Harris administration. But where do you guys think, Dan, you first, where do you think the debate is? Is that congealing as what people are going to stick to? Is it blame Biden? Is it cultural issues? Is it, you know, where is the balance of the argument right now, knowing that it's going to continue to evolve?
I think that's it. It's going to continue to evolve. And I think right now, the elephant in the room remains the candidate. And I think basically there's the stuff about the party being, you know, too woke. There's the issues about Biden. You know, the Biden people are taking kind of their victory lap, so to speak, in that like, hey, our economic policies were really good. You know, it breaks our heart that it didn't penetrate, but like it always says the same thing. We're better off than the rest of the world. Things are actually really good. And I think that, you know, once the party gets past that, and as you see more of these autopsies, some of it is going to be her inability to make decisions and the just kind of like do no harm theory that they ran with. And so I think there's more to come on the party soul searching.
Yeah. Sean?
I think if you, I mean, look, it's so blatant that it's the candidate that anyone, I mean, if that's not what people on the left want to talk about, God bless them. Because to me, I mean, it was so easy. Donald Trump really effectively talked about issues that were affecting everyday Americans. Go back to that CBS poll I mentioned earlier this morning. There's still 57% of Americans support mass deportations. And you have a woman who wouldn't visit the border. I mean, to me, the candidate and her messaging was so bad that I think that's 60% of the problem.
Yeah. So it's interesting because we've talked about it here at length. I talked about it all cycle without just being disrespectful to her. I just saw her limits in this, particularly as I said over and over. She's not good at making tough decisions under pressure, and that's the job description. I think the Politico story as an artifact is so interesting. They style themselves as kind of like the Bible of political coverage, very sophisticated. There's barely a word in there about the candidate being the problem. To the contrary, it's the greatest celebration of anybody's written so far about how what a wonderful candidate she was and how it wasn't her fault and that she's got all this goodwill and people are stoked about supporting her again. It's truly an exhibit of denialism. But there's been almost nothing written about how she performs the candidate. Admirable of her people not to leak about it. But I guarantee you, particularly the people who worked for Barack Obama and even Hillary Clinton, they know full well what a disastrous candidate they was. They're not talking about it yet. But I agree with you guys. Eventually, this will be part of the conversation, which is why the Politico story touting her as a future candidate seems a little off key to me. Sean.
Well,
when I popped on, go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, Sean, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I came across CNN this morning, there was a political panel, Scott Jennings and Karen Finney, talking about this story. They were asking about the story that we're talking about. And Karen Finney, who's a very, very smart and experienced hand, was like, she's an amazing candidate. The world is her oyster. Her future is bright. And I'm like, again, I get it. Like, I would not want to, I don't crap on my former clients or it's just not, but there's a degree of reality there. And just to say, hey, I think that she's a great person, but next time she'll have to be more focused. I mean, there's a degree to which the head in the sand exists on her aides. Number two, I mean, with respect to Politico, and I don't know it, I'm no huge fan of the organization, but the writer of the story, Eugene Daniels, has been basically a spokesman in waiting for Kamala if she won. I mean, I think he would have been her press secretary. So part of it is that they're assigning people to write these stories who fawn over her as if they're their spokesperson, not an objective reporter.
100% double byline on that piece, but go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I agree. Chris is actually better than that.
Yeah. Yes. Go ahead.
People in the chat saying, like, why do I hate Kamala Harris? And I thought you were a Dem. I am a Dem. I think the thing is, candidates matter. And I think the party has problems that you're seeing talked about. But it's also undeniable that candidate quality matters, right? Donald Trump is an outstanding political athlete, right? He challenged his party orthodoxy across the board in 2016, right? He took risks. This time around, he went on platforms that nobody had gone on before because he's a consumer of kind of pop culture and what's hot and what's new. Candidates matter. And it's not being a bad Democrat to say Kamala Harris was a bad candidate, in my opinion. There'll be people who say, yeah.
Raise your hand if you want to get in the conversation. There's a debate in the party. Yep. Happens all the time. Did they not go to the center enough? Okay. There are people on the left who say, no, that's not it. There are lots of people, a lot of donors, lots of members of Congress, lots of strategists who say, of course. One of the laughable things in the Politico story is it says, well, she proved she could run as a centrist. She nimbly moved to the center. No, she did not. She gratuitously, whatever the right word is, she abandoned some positions, normally through the mouths of anonymous spokespeople saying she no longer believes left-wing things. She didn't stake out any centrist view. She said she owned a gun. Except for that, she staked out no centrist view in a principled, articulate, Clinton-esque, Obama-esque way of saying, even Hillary Clinton did this. Here's where I'm putting my flag down. And I've said this before, a candidate who runs for president who never says, here's where my party gets it wrong, is going to have a hard time winning a general election. So the notion that she ran as a more of a centrist and therefore she can be the leader of the party's efforts to define itself in a more centrist way, I think is just flat out false. And it's part of why that story seemed off key to me, Sean.
I was going to say, I mean, look, at the end of the day, we talked about this countless times. She comes across inauthentic. The gun comment was, I own a Glock. Like, I was about to say which way, I joked with someone at one point. I wanted to say, do you have the safety on or off? Just a trick question for Glock owners. But the idea was that it didn't come across as real. When people attacked her and her mannerisms, it was, well, it's racist and gender. You're attacking her gender. And it's like, no, she's a bad candidate. I always thought the best example of this, Dan kind of raised Trump a little. In 2012, when Romney was running, he was sort of embarrassed of his wealth. He'd be like, well, I made this money, but I really didn't want it. Trump kind of wanted to go, I love having this much money. I'm rich as hell, and I want you to be rich. He embraced it. And it was kind of refreshing to hear somebody speak with, in that when he got asked about lobbying, of course I did. I bought everybody. That's how I work. I mean, it was so real. And I think that anytime that if you want to just chalk it up to attacks on her gender and race, then you're missing the broader point. She's a bad candidate. She's inauthentic. And I think the longer that people have their head on the sand of that, the longer that they'll continue to nominate her and push her when there's probably better people. I mean, the example I give, look at Wes Moore. When that guy comes out, he's the real deal. I mean, I think as a Republican, I look at Wes Moore as somebody that I think, I'd have a hard time. I think we'd have a harder time messaging against a guy like him, but he comes across very authentic. He's got a great story, and very relatable.
John Lawrence, welcome in. We're going to get to you in a moment. All right, guys, didn't warn you about this, putting you on the spot. Today, not holding you to it because things can change. Dan, who are the two most likely Democratic presidential nominees in 28? Two names.
Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer.
Son.
Wes Moore, as I just said, and Pete Buttigieg.
The correct answers are Josh Shapiro and Pete Buttigieg. You both got half right. John Lawrence, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell us where you are. If you'd like to tell us who you voted for, you can. And what's on your mind, please.
Sure. I'm from Rhode Island, and I voted, and I voted back, I voted for Obama, then I wrote in, and then I wrote in again, so far. So in terms of and I just want to say thank you for the platform. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Still annoyed with you for making me like Sean Spicer. So that's been...
You're clearly not from the East Bay.
No, I'm from Burrillville, if you know where that is.
Yeah.
That's
what I thought.
Yeah, that's right. So like that, we up here we mostly went for Trump in the area. So I'm a primary care physician in the area, but I had some questions more about just some things that I'm concerned about with, and you brought up before, things like lobbying. And there's a lot of talk about kind of rebooting Washington. And one of my big concerns is the power that lobbying has within both, especially in medicine, the kind of negative impacts I think it has there. And then in other areas of government in general, I worry about getting rid of a lot of civil servants who then often can come back if they're paid by industry and know the ropes to become like industry advocates. And where there is like, is there discussion anywhere about kind of tamping down on lobbying's effects in that way? And then I'll say one more thing, which is, at least at my medical school, we do get a lot on nutrition. We have a whole course on it and things like that. So, yeah. But
okay, what kind of practice do you have, John?
I'm a family practitioner, general practice. I see all the things all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining. I'll say briefly, Donald Trump is in his first campaign, of course, draining the swamp, paid lip service to reducing the influence of special interests. He didn't really do that. He empowered a lot of special interests. I think it's one of the areas that it deserves the most scrutiny. Now, so did the Biden administration. There are lobbyists all over the Biden administration in senior roles and revolving door and helping friends and family. And it's they don't have any clean hands on this either. And it's hard, right? It's hard to break the powers of special interests because money is so influential, and particularly in medicine. Now, Bobby Kennedy, I said this in the show last week. If you take him at his word, and Sean's right that cabinet secretaries don't necessarily make policy, but he's really interested in breaking the nexus between corporate special interests and policy, particularly in the areas of healthcare. So let's see. Donald Trump seems to be empowering him. Let's see if at least in the area of health, I doubt it'll happen in terms of defense or crypto or financial services in general. I think money will talk there, but I think it's possible that it could be broken a little bit in health. We shall see. Sean.
Yeah, I think the interesting question or the question that you ask is really intriguing, because part of the problem, I think, is that there's the folks who've lobbied it have all come from big pharma, and what you've seen out of the discussion here is to break that up, because there's so many conflicts at FDA, CDC, and NIH. And I think it's actually what we've seen through this citizen, social media effort, the MAHA effort that Callie and Casey Means. I mean, are you familiar with their work yet, Doc?
So I am a little bit familiar with some of their work. I haven't sat down with I know there was another doctor on, John, who had talked about some things that he had gone through every reference. I've done that with a few things for them, but I have not certainly taken the time it seems he has.
So let me ask you this. When you go through these things, do you think that they're completely nuts or there's some merit to them?
So no, like most things, I think there's merit in a lot of what people have to say there. And I think that a reconsideration of how we approach preventative care in the country, or just like preventing disease, like they're focusing on things that are important. Some of the science that they have to say, I think, is solid. Some of the other stuff I'm not as sold on, at least in what I've read. But like, I think that one of the things that gives me hope is that if you have somebody in power who then can help us reconfigure our system a little bit so that instead of it being top down, so specialist driven, and then like prescriptive for disease, versus like, we don't value, for example, primary care. Like it's
Right.
not valued. There are no primary care docs. You can't find a primary care doctor. Like I had to call a friend when I needed a primary care doc to get in with a primary care doc. You know what I mean? It is not easy. And we value like not so much prevention as action, because you can't sell prevention. Like if I don't see patients as much, I'm doing a good job if they're healthy, and that's why they don't see me. But if I'm trying to make money, that's not the way to go. You know what I mean? They need to rely on me. And so,
Right.
yeah.
But I think the reason I asked the question is that one of the things that you start to see as you pull the veil back on some of this stuff is the conflicts of interest that exist. To your point, the prevention doesn't sell. And when I have these conversations with medical professionals, they'll say, yeah, the problem is there's no money in that. And so keeping us healthy actually has not become, and you start to realize that the answer is another pill, another pill, another pill. And by the way, the bigger goal, when you talk to a lot of the folks about the weight loss drugs, their goal is to get them on the schedule, right? So that they then become funded by the government and subsidized and on the insurance schedules, Medicare, Medicaid. It's just amazing how the system is set up not to actually prevent you from getting sick, but to ensure that you not only become sick, but then become a financial pipeline for the industry. And that's why I asked you the question I did, because what's funny is that no one denies that this is happening who's actually in the know. And that's what I think is concerning. So from a lobbying standpoint, as long as we're going in the right direction and more transparency, I'm for it.
Yeah.
Dan.
I think the challenge with lobbying is there are so many people on both sides of every issue. It's always portrayed as like David versus Goliath, but it's not. I mean, I was a lobbyist for 13 years. There's very much both sides are well armed. Lobbyists, represent companies. The companies and their staff study political trends. They study what's effective. It's not just going into an office and saying, here's what we want to talk to you about. They organize people back in folks' districts. They organize town halls to make sure that you're hearing from constituents. And I think the biggest challenge is most people come to Washington for an issue or two or maybe three that they care about, but their portfolio requires that they make decisions based on thousands of other issues. And so both they and their staff that don't know something about an issue call think tanks, which, by the way, are essentially lobbying outfits. They call lobbyists, or the lobbyists call them. They seek information, and you get it from both sides. I mean, both sides are constantly knocking on your door to come in. So I think it's not likely that lobbyists will leave the system. But I think, to Mark and Sean's point, are there cabinet heads, and does the president lean into breaking molds? Lobbyists don't bat 1,000. If you have a good idea and the people are behind it, there are ways to move past it, but it's not easy. And it requires a lot of capital spending, political capital.
Yeah.
Doctor, two questions. One, first, how did you find out about two-way?
So I think it was a random YouTube recommendation, but
Yeah.
also like helped with I've actually recommended it to a few patients who are distraught about election things, because I thought that in the right context, it was helpful for people to recognize that there are, I see patients who vote on both sides of whatever. And like, I've known a lot of them for years and years. They're great people. And, I think the idea of peace, love, and understanding is something that we need more of. And I think it's helpful for the dialogue in this country. So I don't know why YouTube recommended it to me, but I appreciate it.
All right, doctor, last question, just hypothetically, how do you tell the difference between a patient who's got a sinus infection and who's got pneumonia?
Well, one, I'd listen to their lungs. Two, a pneumonia can be defined on x-ray. And then 3, like clinical judgment on my physical exam, pressing on these parts of you and then other parts too.
So if I press here,
So if you're pressing
didn't realize-
here and here, you can tell whether or
Yeah.
not there's increased sinus tenderness sometimes,
Yeah.
but like, I don't know. It's kind of hard to do. I do these on video visits since COVID, and it's not always the best. But
yeah.
I've heard
Doc,
you.
if
Mark,
you were
walking
at-
pneumonia is
Somebody's
going
supposed to be
around right
alone.
now.
Doctor, if you were around a lot of
Just-
people at a Taylor Swift concert,
just-
could that potentially?
Just hypothetically, amoxicillin, is that how you pronounce that?
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Would that work for both pneumonia and a sinus infection?
It probably would. And a guy with your likely exposures, I'd probably use amoxicillin with clavulanic acid, which is augmentin.
Yeah. All right. Doctor, thank you. That's a good hypothetical. I got to refill it.
But-
I just noticed, which hopefully I won't need it. Thank you for joining. Please come back. And we
All
do
right.
our medical series. We'd love to have you a part of it. Or
Okay,
when we
fair
do our
enough.
medical series. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Just a hypothetical
All politics is local.
while we have him here. Greg, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Not everyone knows you, so tell them where you are, if you would, after you unmute. One more time, ask to unmute. There you go. Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, yep. So I'm Greg from Australia. I'm an IT consultant. I've lived all over the world. I've lived in the US.
Greg, we're having a little trouble. We're having a little trouble hearing you. I'm not sure if it's your mic situation or your connection, but try one more time.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
A little bit. Go ahead and ask your question if you could, but it's tough to hear you.
Okay, so just with regards to Israel, there was a vote recently. I believe there were 19 Democrats that voted against sending weapons to Israel. Is this something that you think has legs going forward, or is this something that's kind of done and gone?
Son,
I'll
get it in. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think, look, with President Trump coming in and Republicans soon to control the House and the Senate, it's not likely the U.S. policy towards Israel and arms is likely not to change, where we start withholding stuff the way Bernie Sanders proposed in his amendments. I think what is going to change is there is going to be continued debate within the Democratic Party about this issue and how much support is given to Israel and the plight of the Palestinians. There are obviously some who are very concerned and think there need to be real changes, and the party's going to continue to debate this in academic settings and, talk shows. And when they get power back, it'll be interesting to see where it lands.
Sean.
Yeah, just quickly, I'll say a couple things. One, I think Donald Trump, more than anything else, wants to be seen as the guy that brokered peace. So I think that's number one. Number two, he loves his relationship with Bibi and as a champion of Israel. So that's playing in that favor. And then three, you saw the Palestinians try to repair relationships with him in the last little bit. I feel very, very hopeful that for a variety of reasons that are too long to get into right now, that you're going to see action on this front before he actually gets sworn in.
Okay,
and
great.
This gets back to what we talked about earlier. Maybe that's part of what he wants to try to pivot to after the nominee announcements.
Greg, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, Brandon, come on in. Brandon disappeared just as I was calling on him. Not sure how that happened. David, come on in. Tell folks where you are, if you'd like, who you supported for president. What's on your mind, please?
All right. Well, thank you. This platform's been just awesome. I can't believe just the conversations alone. Just real quick, my background: voted for Clinton both times. Actually, voted for Gore. Did vote for George W. Then Obama twice. Ended up voting for a libertarian both times. Then, and this last time, finally voted for Trump. Not because I wanted to, but just at that point. But it's been crazy for me from a lot of perspectives, just to watch kind of where this nation has gone. But I have a question. Here's the thing that I see that is very interesting from my perspective. Trump beat the Clintons, he took out, he basically took out the Bushes as well, just when as far, and now it seems like he's actually taken out Obama, because Obama has been the heart of the Democratic Party. And so this is my question to you, Dan, but it also to both Sean and Mark, to see one candidate like that to be able to take out three just completely dominant players in the space, that has probably never been happened before. Who will ultimately be the replacement, I guess, and the new dominant player, for the Democrats, and ultimately, is it Trump? Is this Trump party, going forward? I guess that's my question.
Okay,
It's a
David,
great
thank you. Great question. Good,
Yeah,
good.
I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. And this is where I say candidate quality matters, and having a winning message, like having a message that resonates with people, understanding what is important to the general population, not yesterday, not the last election, but today, and then meeting them, in that moment. It's clear that he did. It's clear that he is the most dominant figure in politics today. It is clear there is not a Democrat that is an obvious choice to assume the mantle. And I don't know who will assume the mantle, because he or she will need a message, and then they will need the skills and the tools to get that message out, to enter the fight, right, to go up against Trump basically the next couple of years, or at least at the end of his presidency, and whoever's going to come next. Those are a lot of to be determined pieces, but I have no doubt there are people who want to try.
Shameless plug. I did a documentary called Trump's Front Row Joes, and we went around and asked all of the folks that literally make up the travel from rally to rally to rally, who inherits this movement. It was split. Some people want a family member, Don Jr. Some people, but the answer is no one right now. There's no one JD, I think, starts off with an advantage going into 2028. But I also think he's got his own person. He's got his own thoughts that are largely America first, but he's got his own tweak on things. I think that Trump will continue to be dominant. Even when he leaves office, he'll still, people will seek his endorsement, and he still represents the movement. But like, if you listen to Steve Bannon or a bunch of these guys, like they want the movement to exist beyond a candidate. And so I don't think there's a single person in office that's going to inherit it. Even Don Jr., I don't think that Don Jr. really wants to. If he jumps in, that's one thing that's very different, but I don't get the sense that he's dying to jump into electoral politics at this point, but who knows? I don't think that there's one person that's going to do it. I think there's going to be a fight for it. It's sort of like when Rush Limbaugh got off air and all of these different people tried to get a piece of his audience. And then some people got 14 channels and some got 30. And it sort of became amorphous, and people trying to be the next person. And it just isn't, there's no one that's going to replicate that. Same thing with Trump. No one's going to be the next Trump.
Richard, let me ask you a question, or David, rather, let me ask you a question. What are the two issues you most want to see Donald Trump work on?
Well, when I look at the, just where we're spending money as a government, I really want to see that, come down in some ways. So, the Doge thing, to me, Elon Smart, Vivek, sorry, seem both of them brilliant individuals. Love to see them do that. That's probably, first thing. The second thing, I would like to see something with immigration. It's not just mass deportation. Bluntly, I'm one of those people that believes we need more immigration into this country. It needs to be legal. We can take more than 1 million people a year. We can easily take 2-3 million people, but it has to be done in a way that is disciplined, with the right people who have the right, can support themselves, number one, but also support our economy, things of that nature. I think if we do those things, if he does those two things, he will be successful, and his presidency will be considered a success. That's my belief.
Yep.
So
great.
Yep.
David,
By the way,
thank you for
Mark,
this.
I know we had a flurry of nominees come out over the weekend. To David's point, beyond the immigration, I think the most understated nominee that has come forward is Russ Vought. Russ's commitment to reforming government,
As head of OMB.
head of Office of Management and Budget, cannot be understated. And so for everybody that he was supported, obviously had held the position in the first term, but supported to go back by both Vivek and Elon. And so for those people wondering about Doge, there's your vehicle into reforming government. You got the head of OMB buying in on this. Really kind of, I think that it flies below the radar in most people, but it's a huge appointment and a great step forward.
One of the most lovable things about Sean is he says understated when he means overstated.
Yep.
That way,
Yeah.
I just want to say, hey, Mark,
he's like Norm
thing.
like Norm Crosby. Yes, David, and then Richard's going to tell us what he's
Yep.
cooking. Go ahead,
One
David.
quick thing for you is this. I'm totally with you. I think, when they say democracy dies in darkness, I believe democracy dies when journalists become activists. That truly is one of the biggest problems we have in this nation right now.
Amen.
So,
David, thank you for joining. Appreciate it.
thank you.
Have a great day. All right. As I said, the next thing we're going to up is Richard's going to tell us what he's making. Richard, what's on tap there?
Beef buffon daube, braised beef, sous vide beef. So I live in Louisiana. I'm in the district of Mike Johnson. I'm an independent. I voted for Trump and Johnson. I have two questions. One, do you think, do any of you, particularly Sean, think there's any Machiavellian part of Donald Trump? So in terms of the Matt Gaetz thing, I had a friend here think that, a good friend here think that Trump elevated Gaetz to that position to get rid of him so he wouldn't be a thorn in Mike Johnson's side. So is there anything Machiavellian about Trump? That's question number one. Number two, so there was a Puritan writer in the 1660s, 1690s named Thomas Watson. And he said back then that there's a Chinese saying that the Chinese have two eyes, the Europeans have one eye, and everybody else is blind. So if that was a Chinese worldview that he reported back in 1660, how do all the people that get appointed below president, how does that whole thing work? I mean, in terms of interacting with a country that has that kind of that sense of self, it seems important for us to figure out how to do that and do it well. Those are my two questions.
All right, Richard. Thank you. Stand by, Sean.
Fantastic two questions. Number one, Trump can be Machiavellian, but with respect to Matt Gaetz, no, he wanted him. First of all, he loves how Matt fights for him. So there's no reason that he would not want him there. I think Speaker Johnson might be excited the way it all worked out. But I don't think that was anything to do with what Donald Trump ultimately thought. He really wanted Matt Gaetz. He thought Matt Gaetz would fight for him, that Matt Gaetz would bring a sense of priority to the Department of Justice. So you can tell your friend that it's a fun theory, but it's not true. Secondly, Great question on China. I think for too long, and you saw this on this recent, they call it COP, which is this climate change meeting that happens every year. Once again, we're treating China as a developing nation. There is no way, if you are a big climate change person, that you can honestly believe that without India and China's cooperation that we'll ever address the problem. And here we are meeting as a world and still designating China this poor little developing nation that's trying to make it in the big leagues. It's insane. And the problem is they play the victim. Great. I was the assistant U.S. trade rep in Bush, and they go in and they're just like, we need trade to help our people. And yet they dominate the world when it comes to manufacturing, et cetera. So I think until we change the mindset of how, you mentioned the lower level folks, it is amazing how these guys still think that this is, the Nixon administration, we're opening up China to the world now. The world is open to China. They're taking over most of South America and Africa. It's amazing how they are literally dominating, and we're all still pretending that they're this small, struggling country. So I think how Trump staffs both at the top and all the way down is going to matter.
Hey,
Thank you.
Richard, any chance you can tilt the pot up or move the camera so we can see the beef? I
Oh,
don't want you to
well,
spill. I don't want you to
sorry,
spill anything.
the beef is still in the sous vide bags. So I cooked it
Okay.
for 48 hours sous vide. It's about to go in the pot to finish.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then who's getting to eat that?
I lead a Bible study fellowship group in Monroe. I live in Shreveport, and I go there
Yeah.
once a month. And so I'm bringing it
And you
over
bring
for
and
a
you,
That's
community
awesome.
meal.
that's amazing. How many people will that feed?
19.
Wow. Amazing. And how'd you find out about two way?
Theoretically, could it feed 22?
Yeah.
um, I think I saw you speaking with Tucker Carlson.
Yes, sir.
And then I saw it shortly after that pop up on YouTube, and I'm glad to listen to the whole group.
All right. Well, we're very grateful to you for coming. If you can, send us a picture of the finished product, just because it sounds good, and we can't quite smell it from here, but almost. And we're pleased you joined us and are part of the community. Thank you, sir.
Take care. God bless.
Thank you. All right, guys. Tonight on Two Way Tonight, one of the smartest people I know, Ed Rogers, Republican strategist, will be part of it. Sean will not be on. Also one of the smartest people I know. Ed Rogers will be my guest. And then my other guest is a guy who some of you may never have heard of. But he's an expert on peer-to-peer texting. Thomas Peters of Rumble Up, who had a lot of success this cycle with peer-to-peer texting for persuasion and voter outreach. And I don't know why Sean is muted, but those are two amongst our guests at 6 p.m. tonight. Again, full slate of programming tomorrow, morning meeting, and Two Way Tonight Tuesday. We're dark the rest of the week. I know some of you are asking, what will you do for companionship Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Talk to your family and friends, or you can always direct message Sean. He's around.
Yeah. We got a little cleaning up to do today and tomorrow to get ready for a bunch of folks. Real quick, two things to point out.
Yes,
I've
sir.
been in the chat. Keep an eye on the Dow today. And obviously on crypto, it could hit 100,000. I mean, this is insane what the market has done since Trump got elected.
All right. Those are two
Live
good
by the
tips.
market, you can die by the market.
Yeah.
I'll live by it right now.
Dan, any closing thoughts?
No, just for those in the chat who have asked, that was my wife who walked behind me, not somebody else. Just going to enjoy 2 days along with no kids, with my wife.
Yeah. So where are you?
We are down in Miami. Lovely Miami. It's going to be 80 degrees and sunny today. Yeah.
So is that a hotel? Is that an Airbnb or a hotel room?
It's a hotel room. Yeah.
All right. The Wi-Fi is
We
decent.
got upgraded because nobody's here on Sunday night.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you at 6 o'clock tonight, and then three of us will be back tomorrow at 9 Eastern in the morning. Very grateful to everybody for joining. Loved all the questions, and we'll see you again tomorrow. And I'll see you tonight at 6.